and all that happened. So in last week's episode, we see that God does not like what earth has become, and so he has proposed or purposed in his heart to destroy all of mankind. Okay? So we're in Genesis chapter 7, if you want to go ahead and get over there. He has purposed to destroy all of mankind, except for Noah and his family. And so we see that Noah has found grace, right? So everybody else in the world, and we talked about how many people there might be. We talked about with people living to be 800-900 years old, they're having babies like crazy. So the population is exploding, and most of it for the worse. Another example, I put this in there because as I was reading through the story, as I was reviewing, this story is an example of how important a father can be in the spiritual life of a family. Okay? And so Noah has found grace. His wife and his children are also finding grace, right? But it's Noah's leadership, Noah's example. And, I found it quite interesting that on Sunday, Pastor Shannon was talking about some of the statistics. If the mother goes to church, the children are, 30, 40, whatever it is, 30, 40% likely to go to church as adult. But if the father leads the family into church, then the children are much, much more likely in the 80s or 90 percentile to be in church themselves. And I have in my own family, I am seeing that come to pass where all three of my children are now in church. The last the last one has found, I was going to tell you who it was, but I'm not going to tell you who it is, has started going to church. And we're getting the phone calls. Oh, Pastor talked about this on Sunday, and it was a really good message, And so on the outside, I'm like, oh, well, that's really nice, I'm glad. Listening to all the insights, right? On the inside, I'm going, yes, yes, yes. Okay? So the point here is that the family that found grace here is Noah and his three children and their wives. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a direct result of Noah living a life of faith. Fathers, it is important that we live a life of faith. We live what we believe. And so we see that here. Because of Noah's faith, the whole family goes into the ark. Okay? No grandkids yet, but for Noah, I've got plenty. But none for Noah. Now, between the last verse of chapter 6, which we read last week, and the first verse of chapter 7, which I think, I was going to make sure. I'd say it, and then it would be like verse 2 or something. And then there's a particular person in the group today that would call me out if I missed it by one verse. He wouldn't let me live it down. So I don't want to mention your name, Larry, because I don't want to embarrass you. But between... Brother Allen's not here. That's it. Now you're going to get it all. Brother Allen is doing okay. He had his surgery yesterday, and everything appears to be going really well. Shannon said he got up in the middle of the night and went and checked on his dad, and he is not glowing. So we're good. Although he does have a twinge of green around him from the but he's doing very good. So he'll be isolated now for a week until they pull the radioactive disc out of his eye, and then so we should be good. But between chapter 6 and chapter 7, that one verse, 100 years go by. All right? So we've seen God give instructions on how to build the ark, and then we fade to black, and when we come to the next episode, the ark is built, right? So it doesn't really doesn't really give us any detail on Noah's life for 100 years or 100-ish years. Huh? Well, he was preaching. Actually, you know, there's an interesting thought. God condemned the world, but Noah confirmed that condemnation by building the boat. Right? Noah built the boat, and that's because Noah was obedient. God was able to carry out the sentence. So Noah's been busy building the boat. He's got 3 boys. He from the time we left Noah, it said Noah was 500 years old. He started having children, and Noah's 600 years old, and the flood's going to occur. So in that 100 years, he's had 3 boys. He's seen them get married, and he's built a rather large boat. Okay? So let's pick up our story, Genesis chapter 7. We'll read verses 1 through 10 tonight. Maybe a little more if we get the opportunity. So, and I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. I will bounce back to King James a little bit because I think King James has got a little better phrasing on a couple of verses. But when everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice. Take 1 pair of each of the others, and take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and a female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood." So, you know, we always talk about Noah led the animals into the ark 2 by 2, and that's true. God made sure there were mated pairs, but some was 7. There were 7 pairs, so 14. Wasn't 2 of every kind. There was 14 of some. Okay. 7 days from now, I will make rains pour down on the earth. It will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. He went on board the boat to escape the flood, he and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. Okay, so we see that Noah has built the boat. Now, last week we talked about the dimensions of the boat, how big the boat was. We talked about the possible construction of the boat, right? That it may not have been a thoroughly wooden affair, because we saw that in Cain's descendants, right, there was metallurgy. There was workers in iron and brass. And so it's quite possible that there were straps and nails and pins of various sizes that Noah would have obtained and used. We don't know. We don't know anything about the construction of the boat other than the wood, the size, and that it was waterproofed, right? He used a pitch or a tar on the outside of the boat. And so we saw that. So how long does it take Noah to build the ark, right? So we really don't know. The Bible does not say explicitly. What we do see is that Noah is 500 years old when he starts having children. That's about the same time that God gives him the instruction to go and build the boat, or the ark, okay? He says, go and build me an ark. And so it's generally assumed that it takes about 100 years, right? From if he's 500, about the time of the instructions, he starts having kids, and he begins to build the boat. Now, for one man to build the boat, 100 years or thereabouts, seems likely, right? Remember, we talked about how long this boat was, right? It's 400 and some odd feet by 75 feet high. That's 4 stories up. This was a huge undertaking for one guy. Now, eventually, the boys would have been old enough to help. And we don't know that, Noah did not have, for all the heavy lifting of the heavy moving, the towing of the timbers, because he had to go and cut them. Right? He had to go. The wood just didn't show up on the ground. He had to go get it, saw it down, drag it back. So it's quite possible that, that he had some elephants that helped him drag all this heavy stuff back. So, don't like it. Okay, 20 mule team. A lot of oxen. What do you want?
He wanted camels.
Camels?
That's what he said.
You want camels?
It wants some
Okay.
horsepower.
Okay. It's also quite possible that he used a brontosaurus or two to drag this stuff back, okay? So, but the instructions of the ark come about the same time as Noah starts having children. He's 600 when he enters the ark. That we know. That's a pretty hard number. And so we do get a clue in chapter 6, verse 3, depending on how you read that verse, okay? So what we've got here, let me just pull this up. When we read it in the New Living Translation, it reads like this. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. Now that's the way the New Living Translation brings that verse out of the Aramaic, out of the ancient manuscripts, okay? But in the King James, it reads like this. And the Lord said, my spirit will not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, so he's mortal. Yet his days shall be 120 years. And so God says, I don't have to put up with this, right? I'm going to limit this now to 120 years. Now, the NIV tends to read like the King James. And then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. So, how should we read this verse? When we look at the King James, to me, it suggests this is not about individual lifespan, but about a deadline for humanity. Okay? And so, as I offered to you for consideration on this line of thinking, that nowhere, even today with our medical advancements, nowhere does man's life come anywhere close to 120 years as an average. Now we do, I know everybody's going to go, I saw it on YouTube. There's a guy that's 140 years old. Yeah, and can't nobody prove anything because he ain't got no birth certificate. And he grew up in the mountains of Mongolia somewhere, right? And he just claims that he's seen 100 rainy seasons or 120 rainy seasons. And he may be telling the truth. We don't know that. But he's the exception, not the rule, right? We don't live that long. Even there are some cultures where they do have longer average lifespans. It's not over 100. Anything over 100 is an exception, right? So that would seem immediately to suggest that this 120 number doesn't mean what we think it means, okay? Besides that, what do you do with Psalms chapter 90, verse 10? 70 years are given to us, it says in the Psalms. Some even live to 80. But even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Soon they disappear and we fly away. Now, all of a sudden, Psalm says 70 years, maybe even 80. And what's the average lifespan of man? Somewhere in the 70-ish, right? Used to be 72. I think it's 78 now, 77 now. Okay, so all of a sudden, that verse, even written back then, mirrors what the average life is. So what's this 120 business? Where is that coming from? Again, if we accept what the King James appears to mean, then 120 years is not a pronouncement of an individual lifespan, but a timeline to judgment. Right? The sister over here is agreeing with me, so I'm feeling much better. She's like, yeah, you got it. It's a timeline. God is not saying, I'm going to make sure you can't live more than 120 years, Robin. What he's saying is, I'm not putting up with this forever. I'm lowering the boom in 120 years. I've had it. Okay? And we saw that. We talked about that at some length last week. God is literally sickened by what has become of his creation. Okay? Literally, he's disgusted. It turns his stomach. Right? Because these are some drastic measures that God is taking here. He's wiping out everything that has had direct contact on a reoccurring basis with man. Animals, birds. Notice the fish. Noah had no aquariums in the ark. Right? Noah didn't build no aquariums. Why not? Because the fish didn't have day-to-day contact with man. Now remember, I want you to remember, the earth is very different climate-wise at this time. It's also very different, how can I put this, ecologically. Lions do not eat lambs. Scripture teaches us in another place that lions were eating straw. The lion laid down with the lamb, right? So they was buddies. There was no wolf in sheep's clothing because the wolf didn't have to disguise himself to get up close to the sheep, right? So it was a very different time. Mankind, you could walk up and just pet a lion, and he was like, oh, whatever, how a lion purrs, right? That for a kitty cat, you imagine it, 15 times bigger, okay? So God here is saying, you guys have made such a stink, I'm washing it all out, and it's going to happen in 120 years. So if we take that to heart, then it makes sense that God came to Noah. He said, build me an ark. Noah said, okay. He starts having sons. He starts building an ark. It takes him roughly 100 years. Maybe it was 120 exactly, right? It doesn't say. We don't know. How many of you as fathers, I had this thought too while I was putting this together, how many of you as fathers or mothers, parents, have looked at your child at some point in their lives and said, you got exactly 60 seconds before I get up and come over there, right, and jerk you up by the scruff of your neck. That's what I tell my grandkids all the time. If you don't quit this, I'm going to get up and I'm going to get a hold of you and I'm going to turn you every which way but loose. Right? And of course, that always gets them. They look at me and I tell them, I'm going to turn you over and I'm going to turn you around. I'm going to turn you for a flip. And of course, then they start laughing because I'm Papa after all. I can't beat my grandchildren. That's their mother and daddy's job. So, all right. So, why did he say 120 years? Because he knew that's how long it was going to take Noah to build the ark. He said, Noah, you're going to start off, you're going to be all by yourself. Then them boys are going to come along and they're going to get old enough to help. And it's going to take you about 100 years or 120 years to get ready. Because remember what else that Noah had to get ready. Now, he didn't have to go trap the animals. The animals came to him. But he did have to get food, right? Remember, God told him, he said, I want you to build me an ark. You're going to kick a bunch of animals. And, oh, yeah, by the way, don't forget the food. Because there ain't going to be a Buc-ee's on the way. Okay? So he had to put up stores of food that would feed him, his family, and all the animals. Now, some of the animals, I'm sure, went into a brumation or a hibernative state, and so they didn't eat much. But there's a bunch of them that don't do that kind of thing, okay? So he had to feed them. Now, obviously, if they had chickens, they had eggs, so it was kind of a reoccurring, you feed the chickens and chickens would give them eggs, right? But anyway, he knows it's going to take Noah about 120 years. So in this regard, right, I don't think that the 120 years was intended to be a limit on how long we can live. It was a limit to judgment. It was a timeline to judgment, okay? And I've heard it for years. Oh, we can't live past 120 years old. Well, if one, and we'll get to this in a minute in a little more detail, if one looks at the way the earth was set up before and the way the earth is set up now, God didn't have to didn't have to make an executive pronouncement. Mankind shall only live to be 120. He just changed the conditions of life, and it shortened us up pretty good. Okay? And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay. So we see some detail. Now, we had detailed instructions on the boat, on the ark. Now we see some detailed instructions on the animals. Okay? He says you're going to have some in pairs and some by sevens, or 7 pairs. Okay? Now, the New Living Translation here, and you saw this, it uses the phrase to describe the difference between these animals. That those approved for food and sacrifice and those not. In the King James, of course, it uses the clean and unclean designations. Okay? Now, the problem here is, where did these concepts come from? Where do we see clean and unclean? That was a rhetorical question. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves and come up with an answer. Shout it out when you have it. Really? You're gonna what?
The law.
The law. Moses brought that concept, right? Of what was clean and unclean. So how in the world, why is God telling Noah about clean and unclean when we don't have any record of there being such a thing at this time? Well, so it's, I think, easy to explain. Moses wrote this book, in case you didn't know. And no, Moses wasn't there. Brother Alton may have been there, but Moses wasn't there, okay? Moses was given this story from God's perspective. So when Moses is told, these are the animals he brought by sevens and these are the animals he brought by twos, Moses said, oh, well, those are the clean ones and those are the unclean ones. And also, who is Moses writing this to? He's writing this story to the people, the children of Israel, during the period of time of Levitical law. And so it is a concept that they were acquainted with. Oh, look, there are sevens, right? Now, it isn't clear that Noah had any knowledge of these rules, right? Except for the fact that God has taught them, since the days of Adam, God has taught them about sacrifice, right? And what do we learn in the I was going to say the first chapter, but it's not the first chapter. Second chapter, third chapter of Genesis, right? Abel brings a perfect sacrifice, and Cain, not so much, right? Abel brought an animal, a lamb, from his flocks, and Cain brought some stale broccoli and a few asparagus spears and some old carrots and throwed them up there, and duh, right? God said, no, right? So there was some instruction, even though we're not given that explicitly in Scripture, there was some instruction to those folks about what was a proper sacrifice and what was not. Okay? And so Noah would have known this. So when God said, these are the animals I want you to bring by sevens, Noah had an idea of the concept that God was going for. Okay? Now, God had at least told Noah the difference between the types of animals, right? Clean and unclean, or suitable for food and sacrifice. Noah may not have understood the spiritual significance of this difference. We don't know, okay? It's possible that he at least understood some of it. Again, right, what do we see about Noah? And I'll cover this again in a minute, but what do we see about Noah? What was his predominant characteristic? He always did, faithful. He always did what God told him to do. He had relationship. We talked about this last week. He had relationship with God. All right, this is why he was called righteous. He wasn't called righteous because of his actions. We learn in the New Testament that Abraham was considered righteous, but not because of what he did or the fact that he lived his life, but because he simply believed God. And we see here Noah always did what God told him to do. They had a relationship. Noah trusted God. If God said do it, he did it, okay? But at this point in history, what we may be seeing is God preparing for the children of Israel. He knows, right? Because God knows everything. He knows that the Levitical law is coming. And if you have a nation of several million people, and you're requiring the head of every family to bring a lamb to sacrifice, guess what you got to have a lot of? Lambs, right? If every time you have a baby, you got to bring 2 turtle doves, right? And a partridge in a pear tree, what had you better have a lot of? Right? So what God is doing here, God is reducing the animal kingdom to a bare minimum. And he is looking at it and going, if I bring, let's say, sheep, and I bring 1 ram and 1 ewe, and I bring them onto the boat, in several hundred years, when Moses walks the people out of Egypt, I ain't going to have enough of them. I got to have a bigger head start than that. Okay? And so we see that building into the animal kingdom already. Now the other thing is, as soon as we get on the other side of the flood, and we won't cover this tonight, but we'll cover this in a future session. As soon as we get on the other side of the flood, what are we going to see? Noah's going to do sacrifice. So there's a couple of these animals that already got a target on them. God said, Noah's looking at him going, yeah, you're going to be the one I grab first and throw you up on the altar, right? The other thing is, and again, you got to think about this. The other thing is, when Noah comes off the boat, right, his food stores are going to be depleted. Now, they won't be gone for good. They're still going to have some left, but they're going to be depleted. There ain't going to be no crops to eat. So Noah's going to have to take some of that and plant it and get it going. And that's why God tells him later on, he says, I'm going to give you some animals to eat, right? The meat of which that you can eat. And so we see an immediate change in behavior, not only in the animal kingdom, but in the way mankind relates to the animal kingdom. All right? So, whether he understood or not was not important to Noah because he was obedient to God. Noah, it didn't matter to Noah why. Right? One of the characteristics that we have today is when God tells us something, why? Right? We're like a 2-year-old. Why? 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 But why? Right? And so we do God the same way. Why? Why? Noah did not have this affliction. If God said it, it was good enough for Noah. Right? I ask people this all the time. Are the things God does right because God always does the right thing? Or because whatever God does is right? Think about it. Don't shout out an answer because you might embarrass yourself. Right? If God always does the right thing, what does that imply? That there's a higher standard than God. Because he always does the right thing. There's something out here that says, this is the right thing, and so God always does. We can always do the right thing. Right? But where does our standard of right and wrong come from? The Lord. God. That's Paul taught, he said, I wouldn't have known what sin was if it weren't for the law. The law gives us right and wrong. What God does is right simply because he does it. He is the definition of right. If we could look up right spiritually in a dictionary, it would have a picture of God, if one were to exist, and it would say, there's right. Okay? God does, whatever God does is the right thing by definition because he has done it. And this is the way Noah treated the relationship. We can learn a lot from this. Right? God said, Noah, build a boat. Noah didn't say why. Now, God told him why. And God told him why because Noah said, okay, I'll build a boat. Right? I imagine the only thing Noah stopped to ask God was, what kind of wood and how big? I got my axe. I'm headed for the woods. I just need to know how much wood to cut down and bring back. Right? And God said, well, I want you to build it like this. I said, okay. And Noah, I just need you to know it's because there's a flood coming. I said, fine, that's your business. My business is building a boat. I'm going to build a boat. Noah was obedient. This is Noah's primary characteristic of faith. So, either way, we see Noah's main character again in verse 5. He did what God told him to do. So I believe that in this set of verses, it begins with Noah God telling Noah we're in the final countdown. He said in 7 days, Noah's got the boat ready. He's got the food on the boat. He's got the animals on the boat. He's got he's got the boys on the boat. The wives are still getting ready. We all know it's going to take them a little longer to get up on the boat. Okay? God said, 7 days. You get them women on the boat in 7 days. So 7 days. We're in the final countdown. Okay? I don't know if y'all know that. Jackie knows this, but I don't know if y'all know this, but you know, when we watched back in the day, when we watched the Apollo missions come off the pad, when we watched the shuttles lift off, even now when we're watching Artemis come off the pad, right? We tend to think that the countdown is something on the order of, you know, T-minus 1 minute to go, right? Okay, 1 minute. We're in the countdown, 1 minute. The countdown starts 14 days before, okay? They actually have, in some regards, a clock that starts 30 days before. We go L minus 30 days. And then at L minus 14, they tell us to take our hands off of everything and don't touch, right? And there are built-in periods of time when the countdown goes on hold, right? And they'll actually stop the clock. So like when it comes time to load the fuel onto the rocket, they stop the clock. And that's why you don't see T-minus until the L minus and the T minus line up. But 30 days for a countdown. God gives them 7 days. You're on the final countdown. This is it. He gave them 120 years, and when Noah got everything ready, he said, okay, 7 days. This is it. Now why? Well, 7 is the number of completion, right? I wonder if 7 days was the final appeal to all of Noah's neighbors that the flood was coming. Because remember, we saw, they laughed him to scorn when he tried to tell them the judgment of God was coming, right? Rain is coming. You know why? Nobody knew what rain was. No such thing as rain. It says a mist went up from the ground and watered the earth at night, right? And there was no light, so everybody was inside at night sleeping, or they should have been sleeping, and the mist come up and watered the ground, right? And they got up the next morning and went, oh, look, it's wet. And Noah said, it's going to rain. What's rain? Water will fall from the sky. You're nuts. You're nuts. Water don't fall from the sky. The sky comes up from the ground. And so I wonder if this 7 days was one final appeal. The scripture doesn't tell us. But whatever the reason was, 7 days was a perfect number. Right? It was enough time for whatever it was God had in mind. Okay? So 7 days to go. and it ends with the flood event beginning. So, oh yeah, we got plenty of time. Plenty of time. I can cover another 5 chapters. No. All right. So everybody knows me when, oh my God, no. Well, don't worry, we'll be out of here by 9:30 for sure. Early.
Yeah.
See, brother knows me. All right. So, verse 11. Let's look at verses 11 through 16. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the, what? Underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. That very day, Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind. 2 by 2 they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes. A male and a female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. And the Lord closed the door behind him. Or behind them. Okay, so the flood begins. Now we're provided with Noah's age and the date of the year, not the year, but the day of the year that the flood begins. Okay? And so that day is the 17th day of the 2nd month. No. Roughly, and it depends, because the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, and we're on a solar calendar, and so it kind of goes back and forth. But on or about, I hesitate to say this, on or about May the 4th be with you. Okay? Some years it's May the 4th, some years it's May the 10th, some years it's April the 15th. I mean, but depending on, because you got to remember, y'all know what a leap year is, right? We get an extra day in February. In the ancient Jewish calendar, they had not a leap day, but a leap month. They would stick an extra 30 days in the calendar every so often to get it set back right. That's why you could have this day occurring on our calendar anywhere from mid-April to mid-May, depending on when the last time you had a leap month was. Okay? So 17th day of the 2nd month. So I expected to have Brother Shannon here because I was really going to challenge him with this. So tell you what. No. Put your phone down, brother.
I'll read the comments.
No, put. Don't be looking. I'm going to read you the comments. He's going to look it up. What other miraculous event occurred on this day many years later? Go ahead, take a guess. I'll give you a hint. It was before the crucifixion. Way before the crucifixion. It's not a New Testament thing. It's an Old Testament thing.
Probably Passover.
Huh?
Probably Passover.
Nope. Wrong again. Nope. What day was it? I'll give you another hint. It happened to Moses.
Red Sea.
Close, but not quite. Manna. It was on this day that manna first appeared for the children of Israel. The manna from heaven. Right? The children of Israel were saved from starvation. And so we see this happening here. Jewish teachings assert manna first appeared on the morning of the 17th of Iyar. Iyar. What Iyar? Okay. So, also, what I want you to pay attention to is the description of the flood, right? We get a pretty detailed. We didn't get a detailed description of the boat. Yes, ma'am. Oh no, you raised your hand. You got to have a So we get a little bit more detail on the flood, right? What is the first thing that happened when the flood began?
The waters came up from the deep.
The waters came up from the earth. Okay? Water came up first. then it came down, right? Up, then down. All right, so what does that mean, okay? So one of the things that we need to, it begins to rain. Water came up first. It begins to rain. But first it came from under the land. So there are many theologians who are also geologists who feel like that while there may have been rolling hills, right, there was no severe landscape changes, i.e., no Himalayas, right, no mountains, no Grand Canyons. How you doing, brother? And so,
like there's something in the scripture that it talks about how like it covers the high mountains that are on the river.
Remember, Moses is writing this, okay? But there are geologists who feel like that while there were rolling hills, there was no Mount Everest. There wasn't anything that went up 32,000 feet.
With all the water that they made.
Huh?
What the curves of the water that they all built.
Right. So, and no matter where you go, even on Mount Everest, if you dig around, you know what you're going to find? Seashells. You're going to find aquatic animals because water was all over everything. All right. So they think this may account for some of the dramatic changes that we have in our landscape: mountains, canyons, the separating continents. Right. Because what do we see? What do we see in Genesis chapter 1? Right. Well, also what is not described here are some of the environmental changes. Right. Because of the way this water. So let's look at Genesis 1 and 6 through 8. So in the creation account, what do we see? God said, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." This is in your Bible. You can read it for yourself if you like. And that is what happened. God made the space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heaven. God called this space sky. Now, that's the New Living Translation. I read it from there because when you read the King James, it's firmament and waters above and waters below. And you're like, what's a firmament? Right? And so, I don't know what a firmament is. But so the Living Translation kind of modernizes that for us. But we see that there are waters above and waters below. Right? Well, what is that talking about? So what appears to be described here is a significant water canopy in the upper atmosphere of the earth. Right? So a lot of water vapor trapped in the very upper atmosphere. Right? If you've ever done any reading or study, right, Venus is a planet like that, which has a severe. Thank you, brother. Just amen me. Just amen, brother. I saw that head bopping up and down. I was like, but yeah, it's got a. I don't get a chance to pick on you very often. Cut me some slack. So it's got a significant water canopy. So the earth was like that. It had a veil, if you will. Okay? Now, what would that do?
It reduces the amount of UV rays.
Yeah.
Oh, see, there's somebody who's done some studying. Okay? It shields against the UV ray. Did you get a hold of mine?
No, that's just what they always tell you. If the UV rays get you, they're going to kill you, give you cancer and all that.
So when I was born, I didn't have freckles or moles. And I spent a lot of time out in the sun working construction, and now I got freckles and spots all over me.
Yeah.
Right?
Those are angel kisses.
Okay. You need to stay after, brother. We're going to have serious talk. So, right, UV rays, okay? So, what happens? What we see now is water bursting up under tremendous pressure from the ground. Right? Well, if all the water was under the continent, right? So the continent kind of floated on a cushion of water. And so when that water burst up, what happened? Have y'all ever heard the term subsidence? Right? Subsidence? Yeah. That's when you pump a lot of water out from under the ground. And what happens to the ground?
It breaks down.
It sinks and wrinkles. Right? Yeah, so there's a place over in Baytown that they don't let people live no more. But they built some really big, beautiful houses back in the day. And then all of a sudden, high tide was washing down the streets. And you're like, where is this coming from? Because they were pumping so much water out of the ground, everything was sinking. And as it sank, how many of y'all have ever been going down a city street and all of a sudden, right, you're driving along and the pavement is kicked up 6, 8, 10 inches, right? And it's not on purpose, right? And so what you've had the earth has shifted. So when all that water came out from under, the earth began to shift, okay? Now there are some theological geologists, let's call them, right, who believe that this was the impetus for what was known as Pangea, the one supercontinent, begin to break up. Okay, now, all that water coming up, you've got the land sinking, so as it sinks, it's pulling away, you get splits and so on and so forth, mountains are popping up and all this kind of stuff, and all that water shoots up under tremendous pressure into the upper atmosphere. So now what have you done? You've changed the temperature, right? So you get a fundamental climate change. Temperature ranges, UV rays, oxygen, so you get a temperature change. What happens when y'all got in your cars on a really cold morning, turn the heater on inside the car, and what happens to the windshield? You're wiping the windshield down because it's got water. And it's on the inside. Where's this coming from? And if you get it real cold on the inside of your car, it's kind of warmish on the outside, you got high humidity count outside, where's the water? It's on the outside. How many of y'all have ever taken a glass of ice and set it on the table, and what happens around that glass? It puddles up, right? Well, there ain't nothing leaking out of that glass, because if it's leaking out of the glass, you'd throw the glass away, right? Ain't nothing leaking out of the glass. It's condensation, right? So you get all that water going up, ooh, and it's vaporizing, because it's going up under tremendous pressure. It means it's auto-cooling, right? It's cooling off really fast, and it gets up there, now it's cold, and when it's cold, it's not vapor anymore. It's called rain. And the rains came tumbling down, right? And so it started to rain, and as it started to rain, it began to drag the water vapor canopy, because it got up in there with it, and it began to drag it down. And so you had a lot of water coming out from up under and coming down from above, and so we get all kinds of things happening, okay? So all of these things, right, the temperature change, the loss of UV protection, all of this begins to limit. See, God didn't have to limit our lifespan. All he did was change the environment, right? And what do we see if we go past the flood? What do we see? Shorter lifespans, right? Now, Shem, Noah lives, I forget, another 300 or 400 years after the flood, but he was born before the flood. Shem lives to be 700 or 800 years old, and after that, I mean, we got guys, living to be 300 or 400 years old, 200 or 300 years old. I mean, Abraham lived to be 140, and that it was coming down steadily after that, until we finally get to Psalm. The psalmist records that, 70 years is what we got, maybe 80. If you stay indoors, wear a big hat, right? Never get a suntan. Maybe you get 80 years out of it. So all of this worked together to bring us to 70 or 80 years. We see also in these verses, we see the list of souls on board: Noah, 3 sons, 4 wives. And finally, we see God instruct Noah to waterproof the boat, right? We've seen previously God instruct him to waterproof the boat, but who sealed the door? Right, God did. Right, because what do we see? We see the whole boat is waterproofed, and Noah went in, his wives went in, the kids went in, and God shut the door. Right? But the door's not waterproofed. So the door should have leaked. That door should have leaked like Seb. But the answer in verse 16 is that the Lord closed the door behind them. The Lord closed the door behind them. People ask all the time when it started to rain, Well, I bet there was a lot of converts, right? When that water was coming down. Noah was right. They ran up the ramp and they're beating on the door. Let us in, let us in. Noah couldn't open that door if his life depended on it. Because God closed the door. And we see that in Revelation 3:7, one of the characteristics of the Lord is that what he opens, no one can close, and what he closes, no one can open. God put his hand on the door and kept his hand on the door. Not water, nor person, nothing was coming in through that door until such time as the ark landed. Okay? And so we see now Noah and his family, they're on board, and of course they're busy. They're busy. They've got to feed animals, and so they go day to day. If you remember, there was a window or an opening all along the top of the boat, right? And we got a lot of artists trying to tell us what that might have looked like. We don't know. But it was enough light that they could move around inside that boat, okay? And they could see what they were doing. If you get the chance ever, go to the Ark exhibit up in Kentucky. They've done a pretty good job of trying to imagine what that was like. And he's built a replica. I don't know if he used cypress wood or not. Or in the King James, it's gopher wood. Right, that's the joke. Yes, sir.
Have they never found any pieces of the original ark or anything? Or there's never been anything like that ever found? Or
So
something that took that long to find something, or
So let me tell you what we got. On a mountain in Turkey, in the Ararat Mountains, there's a lump of dirt. It's kind of shaped like what somebody imagined an ark would be shaped like, okay? And there's some wood up and under there. And there's been a couple of folks that have made it up there, kind of did a little digging around, but the government of, I think it's Turkey. Government of Turkey don't want anybody digging around up there because they're Islamic, and of course they can't stand that there be any proof that something else was true. But it looks like they may have found the ark or what remains of it. But you got to think also, once that boat came to rest, of course they stayed with the ark for a little while, right? But sooner or later, them boys, they're going to start having kids of their own, and they're going to be like, mama's going to be looking at Shem, or, when are we going to leave home? Your mama's always up in my business, And so, remember, everything's dead. There's been water on the earth for a year, right? So there ain't no grass, so where are you going to get wood to build a little house?
So it could have been repurposed.
So you would have taken the ark apart, at least some significant portion of it, and built until you got forest growing where you could begin to harvest trees, right? Now the fastest is just a point of reference for you. If you look at forests, we got one just north of here called the Great Piney Woods, right? It's a pine tree forest. Anytime you have a pine tree forest, you have a forest that is less than 200 years old. Because pine trees go really fast, okay? And then as that forest begins to age, different kind of trees, oak trees, whatever other kind of trees are indigenous, the hardwood trees, they grow slow. And so if you see a forest that is nothing but oaks and other hardwoods, it's at least 500 years old. And so what happens is, after about 200 years, the forest begins to undergo a fundamental change from pine, which is a softwood, to a hardwood, right? And after about 500 years, the hardwoods will have crowded out all the pines, and it'll be a hardwood forest, okay? So even now they are noting that the great East Texas piney woods are becoming more and more hardwood. And the reason that that's about 200 years old is because the Indians used to keep everything burned off because they wanted buffalo grazing, right? So, you know, it was only after they stopped that these forests sprung up. So in that regard, right, it's going to be, to get a good pine log out of something, 20 years before you're ready to go, all right? So yeah, they had to pull that wood down. And remember, also, it's not just building a house, but building farm tools, farm implements. Now, it's possible that they packed some with them, so they might have had some iron-edged or bronzed-edged tools that they had packed away with them, but you still need handles, you know.
I was thinking about everything, I guess, like,
Yeah, firewood,
so like he could broke it down and repurpose it.
Right, broke it down, and firewood for cooking,
Yeah.
keeping warm. They were on a mountain after all. So anyway, so we see here then that the door's closed, the ark's afloat, and it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, 40 days and 40 nights, that seems to be a rather common trial period, okay, for God. Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain both times, right? And I was listening to one minister. We got a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus fasted for 40 days.
Did Paul go to Egypt for 40 years or something like that?
Paul?
3.
No, Paul was in Damascus for 3 years. It's the same time as the other apostles. But 40 is significant. But I heard a guy talking about a parallel when Moses went up the mountain the first time and brought the 10 Commandments down. There's no record of his face being illuminated. He came down and he found that the children of Israel had corrupted themselves and they built the golden calf, right? And so he got so mad he broke the tablets and ground them up and made them drink the water. And yeah, it was or ground the gold up and made them drink the water with the gold on it and all that. And then he goes back up the mountain to get more tablets, right? Because he broke the ones that he had. When he comes down this time, children of Israel are waiting in worshipful patience, right? They didn't corrupt themselves. But this time, Moses is aglow, right? And you know, he has spent basically at that point 80 days with God. And so they liken that to Israel had gone through the same period of time, right, as the old world. They were so corrupt that when God came to visit, it turned his stomach. And so Moses, being in the office of God at that point, goes back up the mountain, spends another 40 days, the trial period, the same as the rain, right, the judgment period. And then when he comes back down, he brings the glory of God with him, and it resides then amongst the people. So we see that same thing from the point of Noah. There is always someone who's carrying the word of God all the way down through the ages until Moses. And Moses, being a member of the Levitical tribe, the Levite tribe, Moses being the lawgiver, right? And that's how you got your priests and so on and so forth. So that kind of answered the question for you? Okay. Anything else?
I mean, you talked about Moses going back up and becoming a glow, like radiant. Like the same thing happened to Jesus for transfiguration.
Oh, right.
So it was a similar thing.
Think about
because Moses appeared as Joseph.
Yeah. Think about this. What 2 things did God deny Moses during his lifetime?
One not near the promised land.
Huh?
One not near the promised land.
He couldn't enter the promised land. What else was he denied?
Not seeing
He cannot see God face to face. He said, let me see you face to face. He said, you can't see me face to face. But what I'll do is I'll put you in a hole in this rock, put my hand over you, and I'll walk by. And then as I walk by, I'll take my hand away, and you can see me leaving. Because that's all you can handle. You couldn't handle seeing me come at you, but you could handle seeing me leaving. That's why he was all aglow, right? What happened on the Mount of Transfiguration?
He saw Jesus face to face.
He saw Jesus face to face in Jesus' glorified body. And where were they standing? Mount Horeb, in the promised land. So the two things that Moses was denied, he was granted after his death, or appreciably after his death. I mean, with God there is no time, so it gets a little tricky talking about when did this happen, because from God's perspective it's all happened at once. It has happened, it is happening, it is yet to happen.
Did the disciples also have to go with their faces up too? Christ on the Transfiguration?
Okay, say that again now.
On Mount Transfiguration?
Yes.
Did the disciples that went up there with them, did they also have to go with their faces up after Christ came down?
So he had three guys with him, right? The only three, Peter, James, and John. They saw it all.
Yeah. One get so popular that they had to cover their eyes up over.
Yeah, they were. I don't remember that it says they could not look at it, but it awed them to the point where they wanted to build shrines.
Yeah.
Right? It's, let us build tabernacles to the three of y'all, because obviously Moses and Elijah, there's somebody special, right? Now Elijah has no recorded death, so and that's where all the speculation comes from about the two prophets in Revelation. But that's all that is. So, all right. Any other questions? No? That's it? Look at us. Finishing early. Okay. So I've got Liz.